Steve in Milton, I'm going to guess he's not a fan, but he asked some tough questions. I'll give you a chance to knock this out. Since you have changed your stance on cap and trade, have you changed your stance on ethanol subsidies too? I don't think it's necessarily a terrible thing to change one's opinion over the years, as long as you can explain why new information came available. What's your opinion on cap and trade, and did you change your stance?
Yeah, I did change my stance. I almost every other major candidate, by the way, on the Republican side, and because they're my friends, I won't mention my name, but at one point, their name, I embraced cap and trade, said we should at least look at it and consider it. I did, and ultimately concluded it's a bad idea and have come out against it, not just recently, but a couple of years ago, in a letter to Congress and through other ways. So I just admit it. It was a bad idea. I made a mistake, and there is no perfect candidate in the race. I've got a few clunkers in my record like everybody else does. I think mine are fewer and less severe than most. And then as to ethanol subsidies, when we were in a budget crunch in Minnesota, we actually did reduce ethanol subsidies in the state of Minnesota. In fact, shut them off over time.
Do you think passing the beta version of Obamacare is going to hurt Mitt Romney, even though you were considering a similar style health insurance mandate for Minnesota?
No, we did not consider or adopt that. We had a study group that we appointed and said study everything. We didn't limit what they could study, but at no point did I support a single payer or individual mandate. That's not accurate.
He says, if you could take back one of the many progressive laws you signed, which one would you repeal? That's from Mitt in Massachusetts.
Let's see. Well, I don't think I signed many progressive laws. From Mitt in Massachusetts. All right, gotcha. It's a joke question.
Oh, no, I think he's dead serious. If you could okay, how about
this?
From
Mitt in Massachusetts.
No, I made that part.
Oh, you made that part.
If you could take back one of the laws you signed.
Oh, I did a lot of, I did made several mistakes, but again, everybody's got a few. One of which I would take back is I signed what was called a cigarette fee into law in 2005 increase. We had a government shutdown. We shut down for 9 days. And as part of the wrap-up to the government shutdown, I agreed to sign into law a cigarette fee. It raised revenues by $100+ million. And the Democrats are never satisfied. They came back 6 months later and said, we want more, we want more. They always want more. So I look back on that. It was a difficult decision at the time, but I think it would have let the shutdown run longer and not sign that bill.
The issue of China and our relations. I think a lot of folks are very concerned how much money we borrow. News today, they're going into Pakistan to look at our stealth helicopter. Is China our friend?
Well, we're in a competition with China. Now, we want it to be friendly, or at least constructive, but we shouldn't be delusional about what's going on. They are going to be our, major competitor in the world, and I'm for free trade, but I'm not for being stupid. And they do a lot of things that are counter to either our interests or are not according to established rules and procedures in terms of trade and the like. And the way that we're going to have to get some leverage over them is to get our own house in order first. It's hard to tell off your banker. And guess who's buying a disproportionate amount of the debt, of the 40 cents of every dollar our federal government's spending in debt? The leading purchaser of that, until our own federal government started buying it, was China. And so let's make sure that we get our own house in order so we have the high ground and the leverage to start calling them to account on the number of things that they do are not in our interest and violate established rules of the road.
If you're president tomorrow, do you lift the moratorium on Gulf drilling?
Absolutely.
If you're president tomorrow, do you end the lawsuits and the Justice Department's efforts with regard to Senate Bill 1070 in Arizona?
Is that the immigration bill?
Right.
Yeah, I've been a supporter of the Arizona law and that approach directionally, and so I don't think the federal government should be – if the federal government won't do its own job and keep its own commitments and responsibilities as it relates to immigration, they should let the states do it.
What would you do – thank you for the quick answers, by the way. What would you do on the border with Mexico? And in Texas, this is a near and dear issue to us that's not being done now.
I was one of a few governors in the country that voluntarily sent National Guard troops to the border to reinforce the border. It's called Operation Jumpstart. The call came from the Bush administration to see if there were governors who would volunteer to agree to send troops to the border to reinforce, at least on a temporary basis, the needs of the border. And I did it, and it worked. And I was proud to be part of that effort. The immigration issue more broadly has got a lot of components to it, but one component, both from an immigration standpoint and a security standpoint, is we have to reinforce the border. I just spent some time visiting with a sheriff who's both a military reserve officer as well as a sheriff on the Arizona border when I was there a few weeks ago, and he had a lot of great ideas, but basically He said, we maybe don't need the whole fence. We'd love to have it, but at least put the fence in the key areas, the population centers, drive the activity more out into the open areas where you got drones, infrared capabilities, more Border Patrol agents, more, if need be, military supplements to that by way of observers and deterrent and help, more equipment. We can enforce the border. It's going to take a bigger commitment, and it's going to take more a forward-leaning posture in that regard, but it can be done.
To show that you're serious about American patriotism, if you're president tomorrow, would you outlaw soccer?
I was a former high school soccer player, my friend. And
I won't hold that against you. Public unions. Public unions. Is it time we do away with them?
I dealt with this issue before it was cool. Now it's popular and everybody's on the bandwagon. But 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I did a number of things. For example, I took one of the longest transit strikes in the history of the country. Shut down our entire bus system and transit system for 44 days because the bus drivers wanted to work just 15 years and then have the government pay for their health insurance for the rest of their life. It was upside down financially. I said, we're not doing that anymore, and we shut the benefit off for new hires. But it took a 44-day strike. I had protests, people standing outside my window with a sign saying Pawlenty's a weapon of mass transit destruction. And so they overreach. And we got organizations, not the people who are in them, but the organizations, the public employee unions, who are doing things that stop efficiency, stop innovation, stop accountability, and are overreaching in a way that's hurting the interest of the country and the interest of the states and the public. By the way, I'm probably the only one in the race. I don't know this for a fact, but I was in a union. I was a 7-year member of a union. My dad was a Teamster truck driver for part of his life. My brothers and sisters are, union people. They're all Rush Limbaugh listeners now, most of them. But the Reagan Democrats are what I call Sam's Club Republicans. So I know about this. And when people say you haven't walked in our shoes, you don't know what it's like to be, working class, you don't know what it's like to not afford gas for your car or health care for your kids or to be unemployed or to have a tough situation. Yeah, I do. Now let me tell you why being a conservative or a Republican is good for you and your family and ultimately good for the country. And I bring to the table that credibility. And that's really important because if we're going to win this election, it's going to be coming down to some states like Ohio and Pennsylvania and Iowa and a few other places. And you better be able to go in and market our ideas, not by diluting them, but by convincing people to join our team. And it helps to have that kind of background for credibility.
Governor Tim Pawlenty, former governor of the state of Minnesota, tell me an issue where you would side with the Tea Party or the conservative American against the Republican Party, where you do not line up with a traditional...
Well, I'm trying to think of a Tea Party issue where they're not in alignment with the Republican Party. I'm trying to think of what that would be exactly.
I think the debt ceiling would be a great example. Do we lift the debt ceiling?
Now, I've been outspoken about this and written op-eds about it. I do not think we should raise the debt ceiling. This is the spending ceiling, really, and the spending is out of control. And I really hope and pray that our congressional leaders do not raise the debt ceiling, and if they feel that they must, that they get something structural, permanent, real, and big for it, like a balanced budget amendment or actual reductions in spending, not some amorphous targets in the future.
Do we have to cut, and would you support cutting Social Security in order to make the cuts that are necessary?
If you look at a pie chart of federal outlays, red being non-discretionary, and you look at Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the national debt, and a few other, that red part is already over the halfway line on the pie chart. And at the rate at which it's growing, it's going to be over the three-quarter line within the next 15 years, and almost all the rest is defense. There's no way out of this spending problem unless you're willing to tackle entitlement reform. And I know you want short answers, but on Social Security, we have to look the American people in the eye and tell them the truth. They know we got a problem. But we're going to have to raise the retirement age gradually over time for new entrance into the workforce, into the program, and we're coming into the workforce. 2, on Medicaid, we need to shut off the autopilot increases, decide what we can afford, and block grant the whole thing to the states, and require only one thing, that they use it for health care for the poor. But let the laboratories of democracy experiment, innovate, cooperate, compete, and they'll come up with some astounding good results if we take the handcuffs off them. And I believe that strongly as a former governor. And lastly, on Medicare, it's a longer answer. But the short version is this is a 1950 system that has a reimbursement based on historical costs in many respects and has no correlation to outcomes, quality, and results. And that's not the health care of the future. We have to change the payment system within Medicare. We have to give people financial incentives to make wise decisions. And people's eyes glaze over when you get into the details of health care reform, but know that we have to switch Medicare from this 1950s payment system to something that's more modern and more accountable for results.
I have about 45 seconds. There are somewhere between 12 and 20 million illegal aliens in America today. It's a big issue in the state of Texas particularly. Do you deport? Do you give them amnesty? What is the answer?
Well, again, I got a record on this. Even though I'm from Minnesota, I sent National Guard troops to the border. I signed an executive order to say if you want to do business with the state, you have to use E-Verify, which is the electronic verification system for anybody who wants to do business with the state and their subcontractors. I issued an executive order that said we're going to put visa expiration dates right on the driver's license, in the Minnesota driver's license. I opposed sanctuary cities and tried to get them banned or outlawed in Minnesota, and much more. There's many aspects to this, but let me give you the one that I think is most impactful. If you want to cut off illegal immigration, you have to control why they're coming, which is the job. And the current system is paper-based, 1940s I-9 form. I want a job from you, Michael. You bring out the I-9, I bring out my documents, you photocopy them, check that I gave them to you, throw it in the file. You've met your legal obligation. Everything seems to be fine, except what do we know about that system? It's filled with fraud. We got to move to a modern system that's easy for employers, accurate, quick, and efficient. And E-Verify is not perfect, but it moves in that direction.
Governor Tim Pawlenty from the state of Minnesota.